in the EV space, while also keeping a foothold in one of the world's biggest and fastest-growing electric car markets. These strategic partnerships are becoming more common as traditional automakers realize they can't go it alone in this rapidly changing landscape. This whole shift in the industry has also had an impact on policy decisions, especially in places like the US. The government has slapped tariffs on Chinese-made EVs to protect American manufacturers from being undercut by cheaper imports. At the same time, they're also offering incentives to encourage domestic production of electric vehicles. These moves are part of a broader effort to push for more homegrown EVs while managing the growing influence of Chinese manufacturers. Traditional automakers are also trying to hedge their bets by diversifying their portfolios. Instead of putting all their eggs in one basket, as Chinese EVs continue to make waves globally, their reception in key markets is a big part of the story. Consumer reception and market share Chinese electric vehicles have really started to make a name for themselves in global markets, especially in Europe. The attention and positive reception they're getting shows that they're becoming serious competitors in the EV space, and it's not just hype. They're slowly but surely carving out a bigger chunk of the market. In Europe, the shift is clear. Chinese brands grabbed a 2.5% market share in 2023, and experts think this could skyrocket to nearly 10% by 2034. While that might sound like a small percentage for now, it's a significant jump when you consider how quickly things are changing in the EV world. It's also a clear so far. Models like the BYD Atto 3, MG4, and XPeng G9 have been getting a lot of praise for being affordable without sacrificing quality. Take the BYD Atto 3, for example. It's been getting rave reviews for offering a lot of value for its price. People are impressed with the tech features and overall performance, especially when compared to some of the more expensive legacy brands. For many, it's like getting a high-tech vehicle without having to spend an arm and a leg, which is a pretty big deal in today's market. But it hasn't all been smooth sailing. Chinese EVs have had to deal with some tough market dynamics, especially when it comes to tariffs in Europe. These tariffs have been a bit of a blow, increasing import costs by as much as 35%. As a result, Chinese automakers have seen a slight dip and shows that even the best-laid plans can hit some bumps along the way. Still, it's clear that the overall trajectory is upwards, even if there are a few challenges to navigate. On the global stage, things are looking even better for Chinese EV manufacturers. Their global sales have been on fire, with new energy vehicle sales reaching 4.25 million units in 2024. That's a 41.07% increase from the previous year, which is a pretty impressive jump by any standard. It's a sign that the world is warming up to the idea of Chinese EVs, and the competition is only going to get tougher as more consumers realize how good these cars are. Of course, with all this growth, there have been a few bumps in the road for Chinese EVs, regulatory and trade challenges. The rise of Chinese-made American manufacturers are feeling the pressure. They're worried that these imports could eat into their market share, so they're pushing hard for the government to step in with tariffs and trade policies to protect them. In May 2024, the US government took action by announcing a major increase in tariffs on Chinese EVs. President Biden decided to quadruple the tariffs, which is a pretty big move. The idea behind this is to level the playing field and protect American car makers from being undercut by Chinese EVs, which are often more affordable and just as advanced, if not more so, than what's on offer from local brands. This has made the trade war over EVs a serious topic of conversation, with manufacturers and lawmakers weighing in on how to keep US automakers competitive. For American automakers, this tariff escalation is more than just a trade issue. It's a survival issue, a trade measure aimed at addressing unfair competition. The goal is to make sure American automakers aren't being squeezed out of the market, especially as the automotive world shifts more toward electric vehicles. But this new round of tariffs has a ripple effect beyond just the US. It's adding fuel to the fire of global trade tensions. While the tariffs are designed to protect American jobs and businesses, they also bring a lot of uncertainty to global trade. Companies that rely on international supply chains for everything from batteries to car parts are feeling the pinch. Trade relationships between the US and China are already fraught, and now, with these new tariffs on EVs, it's only creating more friction. It's the kind of thing that could have far-reaching consequences for the auto industry and even spill over into other sectors. As for Chinese automakers, they're not just sitting back and letting the tariff have become key targets for their expansion. By strengthening their presence in these regions, Chinese EV manufacturers are still able to tap into a huge consumer base and keep the momentum going. It's a smart move, as these markets have been more receptive to Chinese-made cars, especially as European consumers embrace more affordable and high-tech EV options. As much as Chinese EVs are shaking up the market, they're also making a huge difference in the environmental landscape. Environmental considerations. Chinese electric vehicles have really stepped up in the global fight against carbon emissions, aligning perfectly with the growing push for more sustainable transportation options. As the world tries to cut down on pollution, China's massive push toward a major contributor to pollution. In China, transportation is responsible for about 10% of the country's carbon emissions, and that number has been steadily decreasing thanks to the rise of EVs. As more people in China switch from gas-powered cars to electric ones, the country is making big strides in cutting down its carbon footprint. The sheer volume of EVs being adopted is a big deal. It's not just about cleaner air in Chinese cities, but the global impact too. As China leads the charge, it's pushing the whole world toward more eco-friendly options. This shift in transportation habits has also been a huge influence on what consumers want. More and more people are prioritizing sustainability when it comes to their purchasing decisions, and EVs are often seen as the way to go. The environmental benefits are one of the top reasons why people choose electric cars. It's not just about saving on gas or getting a cool high-tech vehicle. A lot of people are making the switch because they want to do their part in reducing pollution. Studies back this up, showing that environmental concerns are a major motivator for EV purchases. Alongside that, policies like penalties on regular gas cars and incentives for EV buyers are giving people a little extra push toward making the switch. These factors are really starting to shape how people view transportation. But even with all the positive environmental impact, the transition to electric vehicles isn't without its challenges. For one, electric cars aren't always as clean as they seem. In China, for example, researchers found that, on a per-kilometer basis, electric cars can actually cause more harm to public health than traditional vehicles, mainly because of emissions from electricity generation. In other words, if the electricity used to charge EVs comes from coal or other polluting sources, the benefits can be offset, and you end up with a situation where an electric car might still be contributing to pollution. It's a reminder that the road to a cleaner, greener future is complicated and requires more than just switching out gasoline engines. The US government is making some big moves to tighten control over connected vehicle technologies, and it's all about national security. They've decided to restrict the import and sale of vehicles that use software and hardware made in China and Russia, mainly because of concerns over data security and the potential for foreign governments to use these technologies for spying or cyber attacks. This ban is going to roll out in phases, with software restrictions starting in 2027 and hardware restrictions coming in 2030, giving automakers some time to figure out how to adjust. The regulations mainly target connected vehicle systems. Think infotainment, navigation, and autonomous driving technologies that are developed or sourced from China or Russia. These components are becoming a bigger part of modern cars, so the government is looking to limit foreign influence partnerships. This new rule is a bit of a headache for automakers that have strong ties to Chinese companies. For example, companies like General Motors, Ford, and Polestar might find it tough to meet the new standards since they rely on Chinese tech in some of their vehicles. Polestar, for instance, is linked to Geely, a Chinese automaker, which could pose a problem in the US market. Even companies like Waymo, which are all about autonomous vehicles and use Chinese components in their systems, will have to rethink their approach and make some changes to stay compliant. At the heart of these regulations is the US government's concern that connected vehicles could be used for espionage or cyber attacks. With all the data these cars collect, whether it's your location, driving habits, or even personal preferences, there's a serious risk that this information could drive up costs and make the whole production process more complicated. Plus, existing models might need to be redesigned or retrofitted to meet the new standards, which could cause delays and extra expenses. The impact of these rules could extend beyond just the US as well. Other countries, especially those with security concerns, might start following the US lead and impose similar restrictions. If that happens, Chinese automakers could face a much harder time getting into international markets or expanding their presence. This could lead to a more divided global automotive industry, with countries leaning more on regional supply chains and technology standards to avoid security risks. With all these challenges, Chinese automakers are thinking outside the box to make their way into the US market. Strategic partnerships and market entry. Chinese automakers are getting creative about how to crack the US market, especially with all the red tape and trade restrictions that stand in the way. They've come up with a couple of main strategies to work around these hurdles and get their vehicles into American driveways. One of the biggest ideas on the table is setting up manufacturing plants in Mexico, while the other involves teaming up with established US car makers through partnerships. Setting up shop in Mexico seems like a pretty clever way to get around the high import tariffs on Chinese-made cars. Brands like BYD and NIO are looking into building factories down there to make their electric vehicles closer to the US. This could mean cheaper shipping costs and, ideally, fewer tariffs when the cars cross the border into the States. But of course, it's not all smooth sailing. US lawmakers aren't thrilled with the idea of Chinese automakers potentially flooding the market with low-priced EVs. There's a lot of concern about national security, especially if China gains more influence over the US automotive market. Some have even pushed for Mexico to take a closer look at these plans to make sure they don't create security risks or economic disruptions. The second approach that's getting a lot of attention is forming partnerships with established car makers in the US. Instead of allowing them to piggyback on an already established sales structure and get their vehicles in front of American consumers more easily. If they can tap into a brand with recognition and trust among US buyers, it could smooth their entry into a market that's already pretty crowded with competition. Either way, Chinese automakers' moves into the US market are shaking things up for American car companies. On the one hand, the influx of new competition could lead to lower prices and more options for consumers, which sounds great. On the other hand, domestic companies might find themselves having to fight harder to keep their market share, especially if the Chinese brands bring in high-tech, affordable EVs that Americans want. There's also the whole national security side of things to consider. US lawmakers are already keeping a close eye on how Chinese influence might grow in the auto sector, which could spark some policy changes. What do you think? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and if you like this